Let me begin with a slightly uncomfortable observation. Many serious UPSC aspirants prepare environment extensively. They read current affair magazine, they memorize conventions, they revise national parks, they make species lists, and yet when the prelims paper arrives, environment still feels unpredictable. Some questions look like biodiversity, some look like climate science, some look like chemistry, and some even look like energy policy. So, students often conclude environment in UPSC is random. But that conclusion is not correct. If we step back and analyze UPSC prelims papers from 2013 to 2025, something very important becomes visible. Environment is not random. UPSC has simply changed the way it designs environment questions. Earlier, environment was asked more like a subject. Today, environment is asked as a system of interactions. That is the real shift. A wetland is no longer just a wetland. It may become a question on flood regulation, biodiversity, carbon storage, or hydrology. A mangrove is no longer just a coastal ecosystem. It may become a question on blue carbon, climate resilience, shoreline protection, or marine ecology. A battery mineral is no longer just a science topic. It may become an environment question through energy transition, sustainability, and geopolitics. So, in today's session, we will do three things. First, we will analyze how UPSC environment evolved from 2013 to 2025. Second, we will identify the recurring question families UPSC repeatedly uses. And the third and important one, that is, we will discuss the most probable environment themes for upcoming prelims 2026. Because in the prelims examination, success does not come from reading more and more material. Then how? It comes from recognizing patterns in the way UPSC asks questions. So, before we go further, let us simplify the entire evolution of UPSC environment into a three-phase framework. That is three-phase evolution of UPSC environment. If we analyze the papers carefully, the last decade can be understood like this. Phase 1 from 2013 to 2015. That is recognition. That is recognition phase. Phase 2 2016 to 19. That is reasoning phase. and phase 3 2020 to 2025, that is integration. This is the broad journey. In phase 1, UPSC mostly tested whether you could recognize ecological entities. In phase 2, UPSC began asking how ecological systems behave. And in phase 3, UPSC started integrating environment with climate science, technology, chemistry, energy transition, and global policy. This is most important phase. That is why many students feel the subject became difficult. Actually, the subject did not become random. It became integrated. Then let us now understand each phase clearly. That is phase 1, classical ecology foundation. This phase is known as classical ecology foundation from 2013 to 2015. Let us begin with the early phase. Between 2013 and 2015, environment questions were largely built around what we can call classical ecology foundations. UPSC asked questions about biodiversity, species distribution, wetlands, national parks, conservation institutions, environmental conventions, and some basic renewable energy or pollution concepts. The dominant question pattern in this phase was recognition based. Recognition based. The examiner was often asking, do you recognize this ecological entity? Does this species occur in India? Does this species occur in India? Is this ecosystem ecologically important? Is this institution related to conservation? Is this environmental statement correct? So, if a student had basic familiarity with biodiversity and environment, many of these questions were manageable. But even here, one important point must be remembered. That is what? UPSC rarely asks direct textbook definitions. Even in this phase, the paper often used multi statement elimination. That means the exam was already rewarding conceptual clarity, not blind memorization. Let me illustrate by using PYQ anchors, or PYQs from different papers. As far as species distribution is concerned, we have taken one question, that is previous year's question from 2013. That is what? Consider the classic species distribution type. Asked like this: snow leopard, Tibetan antelope, red panda. Which of these are naturally found in India? This is the question. Here UPSC is not merely testing animal names. It is testing biogeographical authenticity. We have to understand this point very much carefully. The real question is, does the candidate understand which species actually belong to the Indian ecological landscape? This is the real question. They asked about Indian ecological landscape, testing biogeographical authenticity. This is the classic recognition based biodiversity question. And let's we take another example, another question from 2014. That is question on wetland ecosystem services. Now take wetlands. UPSC asked whether wetlands regulate hydrological cycles, support biodiversity, and reduce flood intensity. Notice what is happening here. The question is not asking what is wetland. It is asking what does a wetland actually do? The function of wetland. That means even in the early phase, UPSC had already begun moving from identity to function. Another example from 2015 paper, that is biodiversity hotspots. Now take the biodiversity hotspots question. Himalayas, Western Ghats, Indo-Burma. This question connects Indian ecology with global ecological classification systems. The question connects Indian ecology with global ecological classification systems. So even in the recognition phase, UPSC was slowly broadening the frame. That is why I would summarize phase 1 like this. 2013 to 2015 was the grammar of UPSC environment. You needed recognition, you needed familiarity, you needed the ability to identify ecological entities correctly. But the seeds of conceptual thinking were already present in the phase 1 itself. That is the thing you have to identify from this phase 1. Now let us move to the second phase, that is applied ecology transition from 2016 to 2019. Between 2016 to 2019, environment questions started evolving significantly. Evolving significantly. UPSC gradually shifted from recognition to reasoning. Now the examiner was no longer satisfied with asking, do you know this species or do you know this institution? Instead, UPSC began asking, do you understand how ecological systems behave? This is a major shift. In this phase, the paper increasingly tested on what? Ecological adaptation, pollution pathways, cause effect relationships, ecological stress, institutional mandates, and environmental governance. Students now had to understand the processes not just labels. Let me illustrate this with example. That is the PYQ anchor. From 2016 question, that is pollution chain. Take excessive use of fertilizers. UPSC connected it with eutrophication, soil salinity, and groundwater contamination. This is no longer a static fact question. This is a pollution pathway question. I am not going to dig in as it is verbatim. I am taking the essence of the question. This is no longer static fact question. This is pollution pathway question. Fertilizer runoff enters water bodies. Nutrient levels rise. Alga blooms increase. Dissolved oxygen falls. Then aquatic life suffers. This is the process, and this is an ecological chain. UPSC is testing whether the student understand the sequence of consequences. This is the real question UPSC had to expect from the candidate. And again in 2015, 2017, they asked a question on ecological adaptation. Now take plants in dry environments. Waxy leaves, reduced leaf surface area, deep root systems. The question on plants in dry environments. Again, I am saying I did not take exact verbatim from the question itself. I am taking the essence of the question. Waxy leaves, reduced leaf surface area, deep root system. These are like options. Again, UPSC is not testing botanical names. It is testing adaptation logic, dry environment adaptation logic as far as plants is concerned. The real question is, how do organisms survive under environmental stress? This is the real question. That is applied ecology. You have to analyze the questions, understand the UPSC this way. And again, I'm taking another question, that is biomagnification from 2017 paper. The question asked like this: consider biomagnification. Pollutants increase in concentration at higher trophic levels, water to plankton, to fish to birds. This is not just pollution as a topic. This is pollution as a food chain dynamic. You have to identify this. You have to understand this. UPSC is testing whether students understand how toxins move through ecosystems. This is the pattern. This is the pattern you have to identify from UPSC. And again, another question from on environmental governance from 2018 paper. Now take CITES, CITES. Many students memorize the full form, year and place, but UPSC is more interested in the mandate. What does CITES actually regulate? It regulates international trade in endangered species. This is very important. UPSC usually cares less about ceremonial details and more about functional role. So phase 2 can be summarized like this. Environment preparation had to move from memorization to reasoning, recognition to reasoning. Students needed to understand ecological processes, pollution chains, adaptation mechanisms, institutional functions, and governance structures. This was the transition phase, and quietly it prepared the ground for the modern style of environment questions. This is the phase 2, and then we are moving to phase 3, that is integrated systems environment. Now we come to the most important phase. This is from 2020 onward, environment questions became highly integrated. This is where many aspirants started feeling that environment had become unpredictable. But what actually happened was not unpredictability, it was integration. It was integration. Environment questions began intersecting with climate science, environmental chemistry, technology systems, energy transition, global governance, and even geopolitics. This is the intersect happened from 2020 to 2025. And this integration is not just visible in the exam, it is visible in the real world environmental crisis as well. For example, the State of India's Environment 2026 report released by the Center of Science and Environment highlights a very important scientific warning. Out of the 9 planetary boundaries that regulates Earth stability, 7 have already been crossed. The most recent boundary to show dangerous movement is ocean acidification, where falling ocean pH levels are now approaching critical thresholds. What does this mean? It means environmental systems are no longer operating independently. Atmospheric carbon atmospheric carbon affects oceans. Ocean chemistry affects marine ecosystems. Marine ecosystems affect fisheries and food security. This is exactly the kind of system interaction thinking that modern UPSC questions increasingly reflect. So, modern environment questions no longer appear in isolation. A question may look like climate science but actually test ecosystem function. A question may look like technology but actually test environmental sustainability. A question may look like international policy but actually test carbon governance. This is why I say modern UPSC environment is moving towards a system science applied to policy and ecology. Then let us see the examples. Mangrove ecosystems from UPSC 2020 question paper. Mangroves protect coastlines, mangroves store carbon, mangroves support marine biodiversity. This is no longer just a coastal vegetation fact. This is ecosystem service, climate relevance, and marine interface all in one. Another question asked in 2021 that is based on blue carbon. Mangroves, seagrass meadows, salt marshes. These are blue carbon ecosystems. Now, environment intersects with climate mitigation and carbon sequestration. Please understand. And again, 2023 on pollination ecology. Bees support pollination and crop productivity. This looks very simple, but it is actually a species ecosystem. Agricultural interactions question. And 2025 asked on battery minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel. Here environment intersects with energy transition, clean technology, mineral extraction. So when students say environment questions are coming from anywhere, what they're actually experiencing is integration across systems. So, and that the defining character of the modern phase. So let me state the most important doctrine of this lecture. 2013 to 2019 is the grammar of UPSC environment. 2020 to 2025 is the advanced language. To solve the modern paper, you must understand both grammar as well as advanced language. Let me show you something that explains the entire shift in UPSC environment questions. When most students prepare environment, they imagine it like a chapter in ecology, a chapter in geography, and a chapter in science. But that is not how UPSC sees the environment anymore. UPSC now treats environment as a system of interacting forces. If you look at the diagram carefully, you will notice five major domains interacting with each other. At the center, we have ecological systems, forests, oceans, wetlands, biodiversity. But these ecological systems are continuously interacting with four other domains. First, climate processes, temperature, atmospheric circulation, ocean chemistry. Second, technology systems, renewable energy, batteries, hydrogen fuels, carbon capture. And third, economic systems, energy demand, resource extraction, global trade. And fourth, governance systems, international treaties, climate agreements, biodiversity conventions. So, when UPSC asks an environment question today, it is rarely testing only ecology. It may actually be testing the interaction between these systems. Climate processes are technology systems, are economy systems, and governance systems. Interaction intersecting with environment with these type of systems. A question on mangroves may test climate mitigation. A question on lithium may test energy transition. A question on wetlands may test flood regulation and hydrology. A question on pollinators may test agriculture and ecosystem stability. This is why many aspirants feel that environment questions are unpredictable. But once you start thinking in terms of systems rather than chapters, the structure becomes much clearer. And that is the mindset we will now use to understand the 9 environment question families UPSC repeatedly uses. So we are moving to 9 strategic environment question families from the phases which we discussed earlier. So now let us move to the heart of the lecture. If we analyze environment questions from 2013 to 2025, one very clear pattern becomes visible. UPSC does not design environment questions randomly. It repeatedly uses a limited number of structural families. What are they? Across the last decade, most environment questions fall into 9 major families. What are they? If you recognize the family in the exam hall, the logic of question becomes much easier to decode. So, let us examine these families one by one. Family number one, that is biogeographical distribution. This is the classical biodiversity family. UPSC asks whether a species, plant, or ecosystem naturally occurs in a geographical region. The examiner is essentially testing your understanding of ecological geography of that area, particular area. The real question is, does this species actually belong to the Indian ecological landscape? The common trap here is border region biodiversity. Species found in the Himalayas, trans-Himalayan zones, or northeast often confuse students because they also occur in Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, or Myanmar. This is the common trap here is what we call is border region biodiversity. So the mistake many students make is this: they confuse cross border presence with absence from India. That is why this family must be prepared through map linked ecological thinking. That is why this family must be prepared through map linked ecological thinking. That is biodiversity and species. Next, we are moving to family number two, that is ecosystem services. Ecosystem services. The family tests what ecosystem actually do. Wetland regulates floods, forest store carbon, mangroves mangroves protect coastlines, grasslands support biodiversity, peatlands lock carbon, rivers shape sediment and ecological connectivity. These are the services and functions of ecosystem. The trap here is that students often reduce ecosystems to one function, but UPSC frequently asks whether an ecosystem performs multiple simultaneous functions. So, the preparation rule is never study an ecosystem as place alone. Study it as a bundle of services. study it as bundle of services. Moving to family number 3, that is institutional mandates. These family test global environmental governance like CBD, Ramsar, CITES, Montreal Protocol, UNFCCC or UNFCCC, Stockholm Convention, and so on. The common student mistake is memorizing years, venues, and conference trivia. But UPSC usually focuses on function. UPSC usually focuses on mainly on function. What does the institution regulate? What problem does the treaty address? What is its mandate? That is why institutional function recognition is more important than ceremonial dates. So you have to focus on regulation, treaties, mandate, functions, etc., rather than ceremonial details like venues, dates, years, etc., etc. Moving to family number 4, that is pollution pathways. This family tests environmental cause and effect chains. Environmental cause and effect chains. Pollution rarely acts as a single event. It triggers ecological sequences for, let's say, for example, fertilizer runoff, nutrient enrichment, then algal bloom, and then oxygen depletion, then fish death. That is eutrophication. That is eutrophication. So this is cause and effect from starting fertilizer runoff to fish death due to oxygen depletion. This is eutrophication. Similarly, ecological disturbances can also trigger cascading effect systems, cascading ecosystem effects. For example, the invasive plant Lantana camara has now spread across nearly half of India's forest landscape. Lantana suppresses native grasses. Native grasses support herbivores such as deer and antelope. When prey population decline, predators like tigers begin moving closer to human settlements. So a simple invasive plant can directly or indirectly contribute to human wildlife conflict. This is a classic ecological cascade, and this is exactly the kind of cause and effect system logic UPSC increasingly tests again and again. This is the modal source, transport, accumulation, and ecological impact of pollution pathway model. Then we are moving to family number 5, that is climate processes. The family of climate processes involves physical climate mechanisms like greenhouse effect, heat waves, wet bulb temperature, atmospheric aerosols, ocean atmosphere interactions, radiation balance, and albedo, etc. These questions often look like geography or physics, but in the environment section, UPSC uses them to test climate system understanding. The trap is solving them as isolated physical facts instead of system interactions. Again, we have to focus on system interactions rather than isolated physical facts. So we are going to family number 6, that is carbon ecosystems. This is one of the most important modern families, that is carbon ecosystems. UPSC increasingly focuses on ecosystems that store large amounts of carbon. Those are mangroves, seagrass meadows, salt marshes, peatlands, forests. The key idea here is carbon sequestration. Not all ecosystems store carbon in the same way. Some store it in biomass, some store it in sediment, some store it for very long durations. The difference matters here. That is why UPSC focused on this type of systems for carbon sequestration. The difference is matters. We are moving to family number 7, that is species ecology. In this family, UPSC is not asking where a species lives. It is asking what role the species plays. Peace and pollination, vultures and carcass disposable, vultures and carcass disposal, earthworms and soil aeration, corals and marine habitat formation. These are questions they are asking. The trap in these questions, the trap is obvious. Student prepares names, UPSC asks functions. So that is why we have to focus on functions rather than simply names. That is why functional ecology is now essential. Family number 8, environmental technology. This is a modern expansion area. Carbon capture, hydrogen fuel, desalination, bioenergy, emission control systems, and waste treatment technology. This is most important for modern questions for families. Many students think these are pure science and tech topics, but UPSC often asks them through environmental implications, sustainable logic, and ecological trade offs. So we have to focus on systems and interactions. We are moving to family number 9, that is energy transition and critical minerals. This is the newest major family. Renewable energy systems and electric mobility depend on critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, etc. Rare earth elements. And this is not only a global issue. India has also recognized the strategic importance of critical minerals. In 2025-2026, the government of India launched the National Critical Mineral Mission. The mission aims to explore more than 1200 potential mineral sites across the country. Why is this important? Rare earth minerals are critical minerals, etc. Because critical minerals are no longer just geological resources, they are now essential for battery manufacturing, electric mobility, renewable energy systems, and strategic technological supply chains. So, a question on lithium or cobalt may actually test the intersection of environment, economy, and national security. This kind of cross domain thinking exactly what UPSC increasingly rewards. So environment now intersects with technology, resource extraction, supply chains, sustainability, and geopolitics. This is why mineral question may actually be an environment question in modern UPSC. So when you enter the exam hall, the right question is not which chapter is this from. The right question is which environment family is UPSC using here. The moment you identify the family, the question becomes more controllable. That is a structural advantage serious aspirants need. Let me now show you something that explains why many students lost marks in the environment section. Over the last decade, UPSC has been designing questions using what I call a three-layer trap structure. If you look at this pyramid carefully, you will notice that each layer represents a different level of thinking required to solve the question. The first layer is the recognition trap. This is where UPSC checks whether the candidate can recognize a species, an ecosystem, or an institution. For example, is this species found in India? Is this ecosystem important? Is this convention related to biodiversity? Many students stop at this level, but UPSC rarely stops here anymore. The second layer is the function trap. Here, the exam is not asking what something is, it is asking what it does. For example, what role do wetlands play in flood regulation? How do mangroves protect coastlines? How does biomagnification occur in food chains? Students who memorize definitions but do not understand ecological functions often fall into this trap. This is second trap. The third and most important layer is the system interaction trap. This is the modern style of UPSC environment questions. Here the question connects multiple systems together. For example, a mangrove question may actually test carbon sequestration and climate policy. A mineral question may test energy transition and geopolitics. A species question may test ecosystem stability and agricultural productivity. This is the level where the modern UPSC paper operates. So, when you see an environment question in the exam hall, do not immediately start solving it. Instead of that, ask yourself one question very first minute. That is, which layer of the pyramid is UPSC testing here? Is it recognition? Is it ecological function? Or is it a system interaction question? Once you identify the layer, the question stops looking random and it starts becoming much more controllable. So, now let us move to the predictive part. Based on the pattern we observed in the integrated phase, Several themes look especially important for Prelims 2026. Those are called as most probable themes for Prelims 2026. Here I am not saying UPSC will ask these exact questions. What I am saying is this: these themes logically fit the direction in which UPSC environment has been moving. So let us examine them. Theme number one: carbon economy and blue carbon ecosystems. Carbon economy and blue carbon ecosystems. This is one of the highest probability areas. For a long time, students focused mostly on forests as carbon sinks, but modern environmental discourse increasingly highlights blue carbon ecosystems. Those are mangroves, seagrass meadows, salt marshes, etc. These ecosystems store large quantities of carbon, especially in coastal sediments. So, aspirants should understand what blue carbon means, which ecosystem fall under it, how blue carbon differs from terrestrial carbon systems, and why it matters for climate mitigation. A related area is the carbon economy. So, students should be comfortable with carbon credits, carbon offsets, carbon markets, Article 6 mechanisms, and carbon border adjustment mechanisms logic. This is exactly the kind of interaction UPSC likes now. Ecology plus climate policy plus trade. Interaction. Interaction of three. Then we are moving to theme number two, that is atmospheric processes and extreme weather. Another high probability area is physical climate stress. This includes concepts like wet bulb temperature, heat waves, marine heat waves, aerosol forcing, urban heat effects, and atmospheric moisture dynamics. Students should not study these as isolated current affairs terms. They should understand the underlying process. For example, why is wet bulb temperature dangerous? How do marine heat waves affect ecosystems? How do aerosols influence radiation, balance, and cloud formation? This is where environment meets climate physics. So this is the probability. And moving to the theme number three, that is energy transition and critical minerals. The global shift toward renewable energy is creating a new ecology of extraction. The global shift towards renewable energy is creating a new ecology of extraction. So, students should understand why lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, and rare earth elements matter. But beyond list memorization, they should also ask, why are these minerals environmentally relevant? How are they linked with electric mobility? What sustainability questions arise from mining and processing? How does green hydrogen fit into the broader transition? UPSC likes questions that appear technological on the surface but are really about environment policy systems underneath. Please understand this carefully and remember this carefully. UPSC likes questions that appear technological on the surface but are really about environmental policy systems underneath. So we are moving to theme number four, that is species ecology and behavioral roles. This is another important area, species ecology and behavioral rules. UPSC has gradually shifted from asking where is this species found to asking what ecological role does this species perform. So aspirants should focus on pollinators beyond bees, species habitat dependence, keystone ecological functions, invasive species pathways, and adaptation under changing environment. This is especially important because ecology is now being asked through system role, not merely distribution. Theme number 5, pollution and persistent invisible threats. Modern pollution is increasingly microscopic, persistent, and systemically harmful. So, aspirants should focus on microplastics, nanoplastics, persistent organic pollutants, PFAS, or forever chemicals, secondary pollutants like ground level ozone, and pollutant interaction with ecosystems and food chains. These are high value modern environment areas because they combine chemistry, ecology, health, and regulation. Theme number 6, wetlands, petlands, fragile carbon landscapes. This deserves separate attention. Wetlands and petlands are no longer just static ecological areas. They are becoming central to climate regulation, hydrological balance, biodiversity conservation, and carbon sequestration. Students should understand ecosystem services, threats, restoration logic, and climate relevance. This theme fits perfectly with the integrated systems trend. So, theme number 7, that is climate governance and environmental regulation. Another important theme is governance architecture. Aspirants should revise not only the names of conventions but their operating logic, like climate finance, carbon accounting, nature restoration frameworks, species trade control, persistent chemical regulation, biodiversity commitments. Modern UPSC is increasingly comfortable asking governance through function, not through ceremonial detail. Let me now give you one practical preparation tool for Prelims 2026. Whenever you study an ecosystem, a species, a national park, or environmental issue, do not stop location or name. Apply what I call the reverse mapping rule. Like what? Ask what is the ecological role here? What is the major threat here? What climate process is linked here? What governance mechanism is connected here? And what technology or pollutant angle it is attached here? These types of questions you have to ask yourself, not confined to identify the location or name. For example, if you study a wetland, do not stop at location. Ask, does it regulate floods? Does it store carbon? Does it support migratory birds? Is it under pollution stress? Is it threatened by land use change? And finally, is there a Ramsar angle? So that is how serious aspirants should prepare environment now. Because modern UPSC often tests the threat, the function, or the interaction, not just the identity. So you have to focus and identify and preparing for the future exams like 2026. You have to prepare like this way only. Let me leave you with one final thought. Many aspirants still prepare environment as a list of topics. They memorize conventions, they memorize species, they memorize parks, they memorize organizations. But serious aspirants prepare environment as a system of interactions. Earlier, UPSC asked environment as a subject. Today, UPSC asks environment as an ecosystem of processes. If 2013 to 2019 was the grammar, then 2020 to 2025 is the advanced language. To solve the modern paper, you must understand both, because success in 2026 will not come to the student who has the thickest files. It will become it will come to the student who has the sharpest analytical lens. This is most important. Stop looking at the subject, start looking at the system. That is where environment stops feeling random, and that is where control begins. Thank you and all the best.